I'm Christina Moore with McDonald Training Center. I'm excited to share with you a new series that we're going to have this year with the Florida Humanities. They have given us a wonderful grant, and we have the opportunity to have professors from all over the state of Florida come to McDonald Training Center and share their focus and their passions with our clients and our community. So today, I have the pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker. She came on campus today and spoke to our on-campus clients as well as our virtual students were able to plug in and enjoy the talk. We have Dr. Victoria Machado, and she comes to us from University of Florida, and her talk is on sacred water. It was an exciting talk about our landscape and conservation and just understanding and viewing water in a different perspective and storyline. So I am excited to share that with you. I apologize, I had a little bit of a cutoff at the beginning, so we're going to jump right in and get to know Victoria.
But when you see this picture, what do you see? Do you see a lot of sunshine? What do you see in that?
Water.
Water, right?
Sunshine. The sunshine's not bad.
It's a lot of water. So we should probably start thinking about
The
ourselves.
sunshine's up there.
The sunshine is up there, that's right. It's all of this is water. We're surrounded by it. So we should probably start thinking about ourselves as the water state, because Florida is known as the Sunshine State.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, go
In
ahead.
Puerto Rico, there's a lot of water up there.
You said Puerto Rico?
Yeah.
Yeah, surrounded by it, because it's an island, right? And we're almost an island. We're a peninsula, so we have a lot of water. And I grew up down in Broward County. And if the news wasn't reporting, and if you want to just go to the next slide, if the news wasn't reporting on an alligator in someone's pool, it was often reporting on the torrential downpours that happen in the afternoons, right? Kind of like the one that would happen just yesterday. So
It's
water
not
was,
healthy for alligators to be inside the pool.
Oh,
It's the
yeah.
chlorine.
you're right, they sometimes end up there. But you're right, they should not be in the pool. But they end up there because their habitats have been taken, right? So that's another thing about the environment, is that we kind of have to think about how are we sharing the environment. So water is everywhere, and this is you can kind of see this. When I came up to North Florida, there was hardly any water. We were in a drought. And what's a drought?
No water, no rain.
No water, no rain, right? And if you want to go to the next slide, there were docks that extended to like a marshy pond where a once really big lake was. So just last year, we had a similar situation where it was a similar drought-like situation where we all couldn't go near the water. They closed off our beaches, they closed off our lakes, they closed off our rivers, and we for people who rely on that as a form of recreation or as a form of sustenance when you're fishing and you have to feed your family with this fish, it distanced us from the waterways.
Yep.
And what year was that?
This was just last year.
Last June.
COVID. So they closed down a lot of beaches. There was a time where they said nobody can go to the beach, right?
Yeah.
And there were other places, state parks were closed, right?
All the parks were
People
closed.
still found ways in.
Oh, sure, yeah. People still found ways in. That's true. But still, even in those cases, we still had water, and it was usually hidden from the public eye. So it was beneath our feet in something called the Florida Aquifer. And the Florida Aquifer is one of the most productive aquifer systems in the world. So if you're familiar with the Florida Springs, has anyone been to a Florida spring?
No.
Oh, a couple of you have been, though. Yeah, what spring have you been? You're from Tallahassee. You probably know some springs up there, right?
Yeah, but
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Other people have been to Florida Springs.
I do.
Jenny Springs near
Jenny
Gainesville.
Springs. So there are a handful of these freshwater springs, and they're these just golden gems in the middle of the state, right?
Yep.
Well, these are kind of these, they connect to the aquifer, and some of the underground caves are so big that you could fit a small car through them. So this is the picture. This is a picture of a scuba diver who's under the ground. They're in the aquifer. So here's a question for you, and we can go to the next slide. How many square miles does Florida's aquifer encompass? And I'm giving you a hint here because the entire state of Florida is roughly 58,000 square miles. So
58,000 miles.
this is how big Florida is. And how about if we just say, if you think it's A, 40,000, you can raise your hand. If you think it's B, 60,000, you can raise your hand. Here's a couple of B's. C, 80,000, raise your hand.
80,000.
And D, all of those of you who haven't raised your hand, now's your opportunity, 100,000. Okay, for those of you who picked D, 100,000, you're correct. So let's go to the next slide. So for the rest of you, you might think that's kind of strange because Florida is only 58,000 square miles.
Wow.
So where does the rest of this come from? Well, the rest of it comes because this aquifer extends out into southeastern Georgia. It extends into southern Alabama, southern South Carolina, and it covers all of Florida. So even when we're low on water, there's still a lot of it around. But the thing is that when we're in a drought, it can be really stressful for our water. And the other thing is that we have this growing population. So Florida surpassed New York in terms of becoming the third largest state in the United States. That means we have the third largest population in the U.S.
Okay, I thought New York would be higher than California.
So it goes Texas and California, and so California, Texas, and then Florida, we just surpassed New York, and there are still tons and tons and tons of people who are moving here to our state, right? So that's
From New York.
a lot of times from New York. That's
I'm from New York.
Oh yeah, so there's a
That
lot
means
of,
this is 80.
there's a lot of people coming here, and the thing is
I don't
that
miss it anymore.
we can't think that we have an infinite supply to use for our pleasure, because if we abuse the water, we won't have it anymore. So water can't be just a commodity. It has to be more than that. And this is something that's been going on for a very long time. So this photo is from 1913 when they were dredging Florida with all of our swamps. They were filling them in. They wanted to get rid of the water. And it's these development surges that have really put strain on our resources. So we continue to do that. We continue to build. We continue to develop really fast. And so just a few years ago,
a very, very old Florida sign.
we had this open for business sign. And if you think about business, it's really just it doesn't necessarily take into consideration the environment or sometimes the people who live there. Sometimes it really just is trying to generate revenue, which can be really helpful, but we need everything to work together. We need business to work with environment and to work with people's livelihoods. So one other point that I'd like to mention here is that, we can go to this one. And we're not going to watch the video, but this is at least a kind of a picture that shows with waterways, when contamination happens, it can be really hard to clean up water. So it's really important to know that water is one of those resources that can be really difficult to clean up, especially if there's a lot of toxic chemicals that are happening or spilling into it. And just
build the filter.
So sometimes you can build filters.
Like oil?
But exactly, if something like oil spills, particularly those of you who might remember the Gulf oil spill, that was really bad for not just
For animals.
Yes, it was bad for the animals, but it was also bad
And the fish.
for our tourism. People didn't want to come to Florida because you had all of this this oil that's washing up on the shore. And unfortunately, they sunk the oil,
And then we
it's
have
still out
that
there. Red tide.
red tide that's
Yes.
going on where the fish are up on the
Exactly.
beaches and then they smell
And we'll continue. We'll talk a little bit
and
about
then,
that.
but it also has that smell where it's really bad.
Really bad. Yeah. It's
that
and
they've
it
been
hurts.
showing on the news.
Right. It hurts your respiratory. It hurts when you breathe. So in 2018, Environment Florida ranked our state as 10th in the nation for industries violating the Clean Water Act. And the Clean Water Act is meant to protect our water. So you have all of these industries that haven't been super great when it comes to protecting our water.
Okay, I would never think of
Yeah, unfortunately these things happen. So oftentimes when we hear this information, we tend to think about our own water, but I want us to also think about the water collectively, the water that we share as a community. And that's how we're going to be rethinking this story, right? This story about Florida's water. Yes?
Is the water comes from like Encompass or something?
That's a good point. Okay, you mean like the jugs of water that you buy in the store?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the bottled water, that comes from somewhere. And oftentimes people need bottled water because of pipes, right? In Flint, Michigan, that was really bad where they have lead pipes, so they have to use bottled water.
Yes.
But then the other bad side about bottled water is that sometimes, so here up in Gainesville, they have put a facility at Ginny Springs actually where they are bottling water. They're taking resources from a community, and that's also not super great. So you have these things that are kind of competing interests. So I think that was a really great point though. So I'm going to talk today about the spiritual motivations of environmentalists who love and advocate for these water bodies. And we're going to focus on issues related to the springs and the Everglades, but I think that it will also come into when you're thinking about what's going on locally here too. So we're going to think about what it means when we think about the water as sacred. And I want to take you back to 2016. And in 2016, South Florida experienced a really extensive toxic algae bloom that wreaked havoc on the waterways. And as you were mentioning about the red tide just compacted it. It really just got really bad. So this blue-green algae, so red tide is usually coming off the coast, and blue-green algae is happening in Lake Okeechobee, and it's happening there because there are a lot of people who live around the area. There's a lot of agriculture. There's a lot of nutrients really that's going into the lake, and it's causing this cyanobacteria similar to the algae. It can be really hard when you breathe, and it caused the state to declare a state of emergency in 2016. And by 2017, the blooms nearly covered Lake Okeechobee, and you have all of these people who are talking about it. And it led to fish kills and marine kills. There were turtles that were washing up dead. There were manatees that were dying. And it led to another state of emergency in 2018. And all of this was due to industry and agriculture and storm runoff, as well as septic tanks and rampant development. And it severely impacted the people who lived there, similar to the red tide, and it also impacted the tourists because people didn't want to come to Florida again because the water was so bad. So it damaged local economies and it caused these respiratory issues. And during this time, environmental groups didn't know what to do. So
Nobody was allowed on the beaches at that time.
Right, and nobody was allowed on the beaches, which really hurt the local population and, like I said, tourism. So environmental groups were trying to figure out what to do.
They had taken off all the beaches.
That's right, yeah.
They taped off all the beaches and saying you can't go on the beaches, you can't go near it because it's dangerous.
Yeah, and think about how you feel if you were going to the beach a lot and then you couldn't go, right?
Right.
You know, if you have a special place that you
Like
go
if,
to all
like
the
if
time,
you were making a day to go to the beach,
and then you
and
couldn't
there'd be
go.
a sign there saying you can't go, then your day would be busted.
Right, exactly. Your day's busted. That's it. You're done, right? Did you have a question?
Talking Springs, the beach too. It's closed.
Yeah.
Beach is closed.
Community, maybe someone down there, going from the beach.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so there are different beaches that have been opened and closed, all due to different things. So while a lot of people were turning to petitions to open these beaches, some people turned to prayer. So you have to understand that I study religion. So I study a lot of people who are doing prayer and ceremonies and ritual, and that's what one of these groups decided to do. They decided to start praying for the water, and they started to have rituals on beaches to pray for healing for the water. And so this began before the outbreaks, but they continued throughout them.
A lot of us get to go to the beach across the street from here.
Oh yeah, that's a really, I
We
hear it's
do.
a wonderful beach.
My group goes with Nancy, and we go and have a picnic over there.
And that's what people love to do, right? They love to go and have picnics at the beach. So
Or
when,
just go there and absorb the sun.
or absorb the sun.
Or
Those
just
people
go,
are usually
or
lobster red 24/7.
Right. So when and you don't want to get lobster red, right? So
we walk along the
oftentimes.
beaches and collect shells.
And so these people are
Victoria's
going
speech.
to the beach and they're having a ceremony. They're having a prayer ceremony. And they're praying for the healing of the water. And I know that this is not, sometimes people are like, does that even work? We're not sure if that works, right? But the point of this is to keep in mind that they are changing the story. Remember how we were talking about stories? They're changing how we understand water, right? Because if for people who do pray, they pray for their mother, they pray for their father, they pray for their children, they pray for their cousins, they pray for their friends. These people are praying for the water. They're praying for something because it's important to them. So that's really important to keep in mind. So in South Florida, the sacred water ceremonies drew from this idea of energy and promoting positive energy. And they also drew from earth-based belief systems in order to honor and to bless the water. And healing energy. So these were a couple of the books that they talked about. And some of these people are not necessarily actual doctors. Sometimes it's alternative medicine, but they're trying to figure out how do we understand water differently, right? And that's the main thing to keep in mind. So prior to such events, an altar is composed of sacred materials, and sometimes it's shells, sometimes it's flowers, sometimes it's stones, and it's put in a spiral configuration in something called a mandala, which is a geometrical pattern, and it leads to a large water vessel, and inside this water vessel, they'll usually borrow water from a local source, like the ocean or a river or a lake, and they'll put it in the center, and they will have this ceremony. And they ask, essentially, they will listen deeply to the world around them. So if you've ever heard of like meditation, this silent meditation, they are praying and they are meditating. They are highlighting the songs of birds or the feel of the wind or the rush of the water. And in some instances, participants are encouraged to take their hands and they put them on the ground to realize the connection between themselves and the earth. So in between these songs and acknowledgments of the natural world, there's a sense of deep respect and care for the water. And water is viewed as sacred. It's viewed as a source of life, and it's viewed as a lifeblood. So what I want you to do is take your hand and put it on your heart. Or if you don't want to put it on your heart, maybe you could just put it on your wrist or on your neck, wherever you can feel a heartbeat. And we're just going to sit here in silence just for a couple seconds, and I want you to listen. And what is it that you feel?
My heart.
The heartbeat.
Heart
You
beating.
feel your heartbeat, right?
You also feel it from up here in your neck.
Yeah, you can also feel it from up here in your neck, right? So you're feeling your heartbeat. It's what's keeping you alive. Life, it's the blood inside of you that's running through your veins, right? So in a similar way, they are thinking about water as the lifeblood of the earth, of Mother Earth. So positive vibrations and energy are weaved into these ceremonies, and water is seen as this active agent. It's seen as what's keeping us alive. So in this sense, participants gravitate towards the notion that Mother Earth cares for them and loves them, loves the planet, the plant and the animal, and the human life that lives here. So such ideas follow indigenous and Gaia-like notions of the earth as alive, or as mother to all humanity and all life. And with these viewpoints, it's easy to see why ceremony leaders and participants draw parallels between the water and the human body, because they recognize that both the planet and our bodies are made up of water. We have water in us, right? You drink water every single day. It's in you. And if you don't drink water, then you're dehydrated and you feel bad, right? In a similar way, if we're polluting the Earth's water, what a lot of these environmentalists are saying is that we're making the Earth feel bad. It's not helping the Earth to support life. So they're taking all of these ideas, and they're not the only group that's doing it. There's another ceremony that's led by a local indigenous grandmother, and she incorporates generational wisdom. And the 2018 Healing Our Relationship with Water event was co-hosted by this Miccosukee grandmother and a founder of a local NGO. And it was held on the dike of Lake Okeechobee just after a rainstorm.
Are there Indians?
Yes, yeah. So the Native Americans down in the Everglades were hosting this, and they essentially decided to have this because of the cyanobacteria fumes were so bad, and they wanted to understand water as an enemy. Water is not an enemy, right? It is something to be supported and loved. And in this sense, water is viewed as a family member as participants listen to the guidance offered by ancestors in the natural world to carry out these ceremonies. So just like you would listen to your friends or your family, wisdom that comes from them, they're saying that we can listen to nature because nature has some wisdom to give us. So broadly speaking, these rituals, and more specifically the emphasis of water, expresses these larger themes of connectivity. We're all connected, right? You and I, we're connected because, not just because in the human sense, because we're connected. We live on this earth together. We're in this room together. But there are other forms of connectivity, and that's the important thing to recognize here. So leaders and participants view the environment as holistic, and they view humanity as one part of what constitutes the natural world. So we're both in the world and we're kind of apart from it. It's this weird in-between thing that we're doing here. But reinforcing these holistic understandings is very important because we're trying to work towards a better tomorrow. We're trying to preserve our water for future generations, and that's the important part here. So some of these people who are part of these water ceremonies, they do other things too, right? They don't just pray for the water. Sometimes they're talking with politicians or water management districts. Sometimes they're pushing for more effective policies surrounding water. Other times, this one participant, she decided to become a local water keeper ranger. So she got training so she could continue to protect the water. She could understand the science behind it, and she could advocate for more or things that would protect the water. And on a larger level, these efforts are happening elsewhere. So a way of reimagining this story that we're telling, there were a bunch of environmentalists who went to Orlando And in 2019, they gathered in order to start advocating for the rights of nature. So they explored a new way to approach such issues, and it became the birth of the rights of nature movement, when they essentially are looking to secure legal rights for ecosystems and for rivers and for non-human species. And this has been done in Ecuador and New Zealand and India. So there are all these places that are saying we need to protect our water because this is the only water that we have, right?
Yeah.
Or we need to protect our river because this is the only river that our community has. So that's what they're essentially advocating for, to be protected by law. And so environmentalists essentially wanted to say that water is more than something to be used for our consumption or used to make money, but essentially water is something that needs to be protected for our generation and for future generations. If you've ever heard of the 7 generations idea, where we need to protect things for 7 generations in the future in order to ensure that these resources will still be around, right? So by 2020, environmentalists had met some resistance from the state efforts, essentially looking to suppress their effort, to suppress all the work that they did. But 89% of Orange County voters approved the Right to Clean Water Charter Amendment. So essentially, Orange County said, we are going to protect our rivers and we're going to be very serious about it. We're going to make it law. So through though the rights of nature movement is not necessarily spiritually or religiously driven, these initiatives align with sacred water ceremonies as they reinforce a different narrative, right? So remember in the beginning, we were talking about all these stories that we liked, The Lion King and Lilo and Stitch and Sister Act and Ice Age. So here we are, and we're telling this story about Florida's water, and we're rethinking it because now water has a star role. It's like Lilo and Water instead of Lilo and Stitch, right? Because it's a character. So it's how we are rethinking how to understand ourselves and the world, and it's important to keep in mind. And this is from Orlando, right? That rivers and lakes have rights, and they are able to now pass legislation or advocate on behalf of those rights. So there are still questions that arise, and it's important to note that these groups are separate, but they still have these larger overarching questions. And the questions include, can water actually feel the prayers that we're sending toward it if we're praying for the water? Does water actually change through prayer? And will laws be a sufficient way of securing rights for nature? So these are all these questions that we have. And I don't really have answers for them. But what I can say is how we look and talk about water is changing. And these are transformative narratives. And they have the potential to change our entire outlook. And I'll leave you with just a couple more things here. And we can go to the next one. We can go 2 more ahead here, right here. There is this wonderful book that is called Florida's Healing Waters. And Rick Kilby says that if Florida's healing waters are to be healed, a paradigm shift needs to occur in the very way water is perceived. And one of the things that I think is really exciting to talk about in relation to this is medicine. So for years, religion and prayer and meditation have been left out of the medical world. And now, particularly in Western hospitals, we are seeing that people are saying these mindful practices are really helpful. They're really helpful, actually, in terms of being grateful. If you are grateful at least some part of your day, that's helpful to your health. It calms you down, and there have been studies done. I have not done the studies, but other people have done these studies, and they show that it's really beneficial for your health. So Well, the idea of thinking about water as a character or caring for water as something that's sacred, while that might seem kind of funny, it's really far, and people are beginning to adapt to it, and they're beginning to take this functional approach. Yeah.
Some people do go to the water to get baptized.
That's right. That is right. Some people do go to, and I'm so happy that you explained or mentioned that, because the water, and it's not just baptism, but in other religions, they will go there for other cleansing and rituals too. So in India, the Ganges River or the Ganga is a sacred river where people go to bathe, and it's a very, it's almost seen as a deity or a god. So in a lot of cases, religion, people will incorporate these ideas into their culture. So I'm really happy you brought that up. And you know, if we need to start thinking about how we might incorporate these ideas into our culture, right? So the moral of this story is that we have to think beyond ourselves, and we need to start thinking about collectively, what does the water mean to us, right? What does it mean to our community? And a prominent journalist spelled this out in her water ethic.
You want to enjoy it.
Right, you want to enjoy it.
Enjoy it and relax with it.
And exactly, so you want to keep it for future generations. And we have to not just think about, we have to think about how we use it, right? And how we advocate for it in our communities, and say essentially that we don't want something that is going to pollute the water going into it.
And that's going to make us sick.
Right, that's going to make us sick. And a lot of people don't necessarily put those two together. And we have to also think about who has access to clean water, even in 2020, because there are still communities that do not have access to clean water. You think about Flint, Michigan. We have our own Flint, Michigans here in Florida, where people essentially have lead pipes, right? And all of this cycle goes on, and it's overwhelming, but the really great thing is that it's our story, so it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It's something that we can collectively do and collectively think about, even if it's a small thought, right? Even if you're just a little bit more mindful about how you use your own water. So whether it's saltwater intrusion, or sea level rise, or drought, or red tide, or cyanobacteria, given Florida's growing population and its finite resources, we're going to continue to experience strain. But if we start thinking about our relationship with water, it gives us a more holistic outlook to tackle these future problems. So we can go ahead 2 more slides, and to this last one, we can go 1 more. So I gave this talk to some of my students, and I asked them 2 things. I said, at first, fill in the blank. At first I thought blank, then I thought blank. And one of them gave me this response. At first I thought worshiping water was strange. Then I thought, it isn't literally worshiping water, it's about making water sacred and important in order to protect it. And I think that's a really great thing to end on, because that's kind of that's the moral of the story, right? It's this idea that we're not necessarily, we don't necessarily have to do something strange. We just have to think about how we're going to protect something. So thank you so much for your attention.
That's it?
I'm happy to continue talking. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer questions. And I have to say that you all have been by far the best crowd that I have ever given a talk to. So thank you.
Oh, this game's great now.